the dragon's secret garden. The wind that night was no ordinary wind. It moved through the mountains like a restless phantom, carrying secrets in its sighs and stirring the leaves with whispers only the brave could follow. The villagers in the shadow of the high peaks knew better than to listen too closely, for the tales it carried were as tantalizing as they were dangerous. Yet, amidst the soft murmur of the breeze, a name hung on the air like a forgotten song: the Garden of Dreams. Lila sat at the edge of the flickering firelight in the village square, her hood drawn low over her face. She wasn't there to listen to tales, at least not intentionally. She had come seeking a path, a place to vanish from a world that seemed bent on breaking her spirit. But the story found her anyway, curling around her like smoke and seeping into the cracks of her resolve. Old Mirek, the storyteller, leaned forward, his voice barely louder than the hiss of the fire. There's a place, high in the mist-cloaked mountains, where no mortal dares tread. It's said to be a paradise, hidden by enchantments and guarded by creatures not of this world. His eyes scanned the gathered crowd, lingering for a moment on Lila's bowed head before continuing. They say it's where dreams are born, but no one who has sought it has ever returned. The villagers murmured, their fear palpable, but Lila's heart quickened, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the way Mirek spoke, his voice tinged with both awe and warning. Perhaps it was the mention of dreams, something she hadn't dared to entertain in years. Or perhaps it was the faint hum in the air, a resonance she could feel deep in her chest, as if the wind itself were calling her name. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered to the edge of the village. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in mist that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The wind wrapped around her, tugging at her cloak and whispering words she couldn't quite hear but somehow understood. It was no longer a question of whether she would go. The path had already chosen her. At dawn, Lila set out with little more than a worn satchel, a compass that had once belonged to her mother, and the faint memory of a lullaby her mother used to hum. A tune about a hidden place where dreams were made. The villagers watched her leave, their faces a mix of pity and fear. No one offered to stop her. No one dared to follow. The climb was arduous, the terrain treacherous. Loose rocks slid beneath her boots, and the air grew thinner with each step. The mist thickened as she ascended, swirling around her like a living thing. But the wind was her guide, tugging her forward when her strength began to wane. It brought her fragments of melody, faint and ethereal, as if the mountains themselves were singing to her. On the third day, as dusk settled over the peaks, Lila stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. It wasn't marked on her map, but she knew, deep in her bones, that it was the way. She followed it, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The path led her to a plateau where the mist was so thick it seemed to glow. Here the wind stilled, and a profound silence descended. Lila paused, unsure if she had reached the end of her journey or merely the beginning. It was then that she saw it, a faint glimmer in the mist, like a star caught in the earth. She stepped closer, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling as the glimmer took shape. It was an archway, formed not by human hands but by the twisting roots of ancient trees. The stones embedded in its frame shimmered with colors that defied description, shifting like the surface of a calm sea beneath the light of a setting sun. Above the arch, carved into the wood, were symbols she couldn't read but felt she understood. A sudden gust of wind rustled through the leaves, and for the briefest moment, Lila thought she heard a voice. A soft melodic murmur that sent shivers down her spine. Only the pure of purpose may pass. The words resonated within her, though no sound had been spoken. Lila hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached toward the archway. But before she could touch it, a flicker of movement caught her eye. From the mist emerged a shape, small and radiant. A tiny dragon, no larger than her palm, its scales shimmering like molten gold. It hovered before her, its golden eyes locking onto hers as if weighing her soul. The wind stirred once more, carrying the faint echo of a melody. And then, as if in answer to a question she hadn't asked, the dragon chirped, a sound that was at once playful and profound. The mist around the archway unraveled, revealing a path bathed in golden light. Lila's breath caught. She knew she could not turn back. With one final glance at the world behind her, she stepped forward, through the gate of mist and into the unknown. The golden light was warm yet soft, like the embrace of a summer dawn. Lila stepped cautiously into its glow, her breath catching as the mist unraveled further, revealing a path that shimmered with iridescent hues. The air here was different, alive, as if the very atmosphere held its breath in anticipation of her next step. The tiny dragon, still hovering near her shoulder, chirped softly and darted ahead, urging her onward. The path beneath her feet was not like any she had traversed before. It seemed woven from threads of light and shadow, shifting with each step she took. The trees on either side were ancient, their bark veined with silver and gold, their leaves whispering secrets to one another. Lila paused, reaching out to touch one of the glowing trunks, and felt a gentle pulse beneath her fingertips, as if the tree had a heartbeat of its own. She continued forward, her senses heightened. Time lost meaning here. The light never dimmed nor brightened, and the air carried no hint of day or night. As she walked, she became aware of a faint sound, a melody so delicate it seemed to float on the edge of hearing. It was not a tune she recognized, but it resonated with something deep within her, awakening a longing she couldn't name. The path twisted and turned, leading her to a clearing bathed in golden mist. At its center stood a pool of water, so still it mirrored the sky above. Tiny, shimmering motes of light danced across its surface, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Lila knelt beside the pool, gazing into its depths. For a moment, she thought she saw her reflection, but it was not her as she was now. It was her as a child, laughing, carefree, her eyes bright with wonder. The sight stirred something within her. An ache, a memory of a time when dreams had seemed possible. But as quickly as it appeared, the image dissolved, replaced by ripples that distorted the surface. Lila leaned closer, and the melody she had been hearing grew louder, taking on a shape within the water. It was a path, winding through the garden leading to a distant light. Her focus broke as the dragon chirped again, drawing her attention to the edge of the clearing. There, half hidden in the mist, stood another archway. This one was different. Smaller, humbler, woven from branches that glimmered with faint embers. The symbols carved into it were subtler, their glow pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. Lila approached it slowly, her heart pounding. As she drew near, she became aware of movement on either side of the archway. Shadows flitted between the trees, small, graceful, and quick. The guardians were watching. She caught glimpses of them as they darted through the mist. Tiny dragons, their scales shimmering like sunlight on water, their wings casting fleeting rainbows. Some were no larger than her palm. Others, slightly bigger, bore crests that glowed with an inner fire. They moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of the physical world, their presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. The first dragon, her golden guide, landed on her shoulder and chirped softly. Its warmth was comforting, steadying her nerves. As she approached the archway, the others began to emerge from the mist. One by one, they appeared, forming a circle around her, their luminous eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. Lila felt as though she were being measured, weighed, against some unseen scale. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the guardian's wings. For a moment, she doubted herself. What was she doing here? An ordinary woman with no claim to greatness. What right did she have to walk this path? But then the melody returned, stronger now, wrapping around her like a shield. She closed her eyes and let it fill her, the tune weaving through her doubts and fears, steadying her resolve. When she opened her eyes, the largest of the dragons, a creature with scales the color of moonlight and eyes like burning stars, stepped forward. It regarded her for a long moment before bowing its head. The archway responded, its embers flaring to life, and the golden mist parted to reveal what lay beyond. Lila stepped through, her breath catching at the sight before her. The garden of dreams unfolded like a painting come to life, each stroke more vibrant and surreal than the last. The trees bore blossoms of impossible colors, their petals glowing softly in the golden light. Streams of liquid starlight wove through the landscape, their gentle flow accompanied by the same melody that had guided her here. Everywhere she looked, tiny dragons flitted about, tending to the flowers and streams with a care that was almost reverent. Lila stood at the edge of the garden, her heart pounding in her chest. She had crossed the gate of mist, but she knew this was only the beginning. The guardians watched her from the shadows, their eyes glimmering with both curiosity and expectation. She took a step forward, the melody growing louder in her ears. The air was thick with possibilities, each one more tantalizing than the last. As she ventured deeper into the garden, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been here before. Not in body, but in the quietest corners of her dreams. The garden of dreams awaited her, its secrets bound in light and shadow, its beauty both a promise and a challenge. Lila took her first steps into the garden, each footfall accompanied by a symphony of whispers from the blossoms and the faint hum of the flowing streams. The air was alive, charged with an energy that danced on her skin and seemed to seep into her very bones. She turned in slow circles, drinking in the impossible beauty of the place. It was as though the world had folded in on itself, revealing a realm of color and light that defied all logic. Above her, the sky was neither day nor night. It glowed softly, an eternal twilight painted in hues of gold, violet, and deep indigo. Tiny luminous creatures flitted about like fireflies, their light pulsing in time with the melody that seemed to emanate from the very ground. The dragons moved among them, some soaring above the treetops, others perched on branches, their sharp eyes observing her every move. The golden dragon that had guided her so far landed gracefully on a nearby stone. Its gaze was warm, yet piercing, and Lila felt as though it was silently urging her forward. She nodded as much to herself as to the creature, and continued deeper into the garden. The path wound through groves of trees with trunks so wide and ancient they seemed to touch the sky. Their roots twisted in intricate patterns, weaving in and out of the glowing streams. Between them grew flowers that defied imagination, some with petals as translucent as glass, others that shimmered with the colors of the stars. As Lila passed, the flowers seemed to turn towards her, their faint luminescence brightening as though they recognized her presence. But it wasn't just beauty that filled the garden. There was a weight to the air, a sense of something vast and ancient, watching, waiting. Lila felt it in her chest, a heavy, thrumming presence that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. It wasn't a feeling of malice, but of immense power, indifferent, yet expectant. She paused at the edge of a clearing where the path split into 3 directions, each one winding toward a different part of the garden. Here the dragons gathered, their numbers greater than she had seen before. They perched on rocks, nestled in the branches, and hovered in the air like a living constellation. Their scales glimmered with colors that shifted and danced in the light: ruby, sapphire, emerald, and gold. Some were tiny, barely larger than her hand. Others were the size of hawks, their wings beating with a sound like the rustling of silk. As Lila stepped into the clearing, the dragons turned their attention to her in unison. Their gazes were unreadable, ancient and wise, carrying the weight of countless lifetimes. The melody that had accompanied her journey shifted, becoming deeper, more resonant. It filled the air, vibrating through her body, and she realized it was coming from the dragons themselves. They were singing, though not with voices. Each hum and chirp blended seamlessly into the larger symphony of the garden. One dragon stepped forward from the gathering, its scales a brilliant sapphire that caught and refracted the light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Its wings were edged with golden fire, and its eyes glowed with an intensity that made Lila's breath catch. It studied her for a long moment before spreading its wings and bowing its head. Lila hesitated, unsure of what was expected of her. But then the golden dragon, her guide, chirped encouragingly and nudged her forward. She stepped closer to the sapphire dragon, her movements slow and deliberate. The dragon tilted its head, then opened its wings wide, revealing a delicate pattern of light and shadow that seemed to shift and swirl. As she stared into the pattern, Lila felt her mind being drawn inward, as though the dragon's wings were a portal to another realm. Memories flooded her. Moments she had buried, dreams she had forgotten. She saw herself as a child, chasing fireflies in a summer meadow, her laughter echoing through the air. She saw her mother's face, soft and kind, as she sang lullabies about faraway lands. And she saw the moment she had lost her way, the weight of her sorrow dragging her into darkness. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. The dragon's gaze softened and its wings folded back, breaking the spell. The melody shifted again, rising in pitch, and the other dragons began to hum in harmony. The air grew warmer, and the clearing was bathed in a radiant glow. The sapphire dragon stepped back, its eyes still locked on Lila's. Then, with a single powerful beat of its wings, it took to the air, joining the others in a spiraling dance above the clearing. The golden dragon chirped once more and nudged her forward, guiding her toward the central path. As she stepped onto it, she felt a strange sense of clarity, as though the weight she had carried for so long was beginning to lift. The path ahead glowed faintly, leading her toward the heart of the garden. The dragons continued their song, their voices blending with the melody of the garden itself. and Lila knew that she was not alone. Whatever lay ahead, the guardians of emberlight would guide her, their ancient wisdom lighting the way. The path ahead seemed to breathe with life, its surface shimmering like liquid gold under Lila's hesitant steps. The air grew heavier the further she walked, charged with an energy so profound it made her chest tighten. She felt as though she were approaching something sacred, a place where the veil between reality and dream was thinnest. The melody that had guided her all this way swelled, wrapping around her like a protective cocoon. The golden dragon, her steadfast guide, remained at her side. It chirped softly now and then, as if offering reassurance. The other dragons had dispersed, their luminous forms fading into the grove behind her. Yet she did not feel abandoned. The garden itself seemed to pulse with their presence, every leaf, every petal, humming with a quiet, watchful life. At last the path opened into a vast glade, and Lila froze, her breath stolen by the sight before her. At the heart of the glade stood an immense tree, its roots sprawling outward like the veins of the earth itself. Its trunk was smooth and silver, gleaming faintly as though it absorbed and reflected the light of the garden. Its branches stretched high into the eternal twilight, disappearing into the glowing canopy above. From these branches hung blossoms unlike anything Lila had seen before. Large, radiant flowers that pulsed with a soft inner light. Each bloom glimmered with a unique color, as though it held a fragment of the sky, the sea, or the sun. The melody she had followed resonated strongest here, emanating from the tree itself. It was no longer just music. It was a feeling, a presence that seemed to fill the very air she breathed. Lila approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the blossoms. Each one seemed to hold a story, a memory, a dream suspended in its glowing petals. Her guide chirped and flew ahead, perching on a low-hanging branch near a single, unopened bud. This flower was unlike the others. It was smaller, its petals tightly furled, and it glowed with an intensity that outshone the rest of the tree. Lila stepped closer, drawn to it, though she could not say why. As she reached out her hand, the melody shifted, growing quieter but deeper, vibrating through her fingertips as she touched the flower. The bud was warm against her skin, and as she made contact, a vision unfurled in her mind. She was standing in a field of wildflowers, a child again, her heart light and unburdened. Her mother's voice echoed softly in the distance, humming a tune she had forgotten until now. The sky above was vast and endless, and Lila felt a freedom she had long believed lost. But the vision shifted, darkening, as memories of pain and loss seeped in. The flowers wilted, the sky clouded, and Lila saw herself retreating into shadows, abandoning her dreams one by one. A tear slid down her cheek as the vision faded. The bud beneath her fingers trembled, and the warmth spread, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The golden dragon chirped softly, its eyes filled with an understanding that needed no words. The tree pulsed once more, and the bud began to bloom. Its petals unfurled slowly, revealing a radiant light that filled the glade. The light was unlike anything Lila had ever seen. It was not just brightness, but something alive, something that seemed to flow into her, filling the hollow spaces within her soul. As the flower fully opened, the melody swelled, not just in her ears, but in her heart. She understood now. This was her dream, one she had forgotten, buried beneath years of pain and disillusionment. It had waited for her, nurtured and protected by the guardians of this sacred place. And now, as it bloomed, she felt the pieces of herself coming together, as though the light of the flower was stitching her fractured spirit whole. The glade around her seemed to respond to the awakening of her dream. The other blossoms on the tree glowed brighter, their colors swirling and shifting in harmony with the melody. The air grew warmer, and the dragons returned, their small, luminous forms weaving through the branches, their hums blending into the song of the tree. Lila stepped back, her gaze fixed on the glowing flower. She felt lighter, freer, as though the weight she had carried for so long had been lifted. The golden dragon landed on her shoulder, chirping softly, and she smiled through her tears. The tree's melody softened, becoming a gentle hum that seemed to echo within her. She knew now why she had been called here. This was not just a sanctuary. It was a place where broken dreams could be reborn, where hope could take root and blossom. But it was also fragile, a secret that needed protection. The dragons gathered around her, their eyes gleaming with expectation. Lila nodded, understanding their silent message. This place was not meant to be forgotten. It was her dream, her light, but it also belonged to the world. She would be its keeper, its guardian, ensuring that the Garden of Dreams would always remain a refuge for those who sought its light. The glow of the tree softened, its radiance settling into a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the garden itself. Lila stood in silence, the golden dragon perched lightly on her shoulder, its warmth anchoring her to the present. Around her, the other dragons hovered in a loose circle, their luminous forms weaving patterns in the twilight air. The garden had grown quieter now, the melody fading into a low, resonant hum, as if the land were holding its breath. At the base of the tree, Lila noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, intricately carved pedestal, its surface inlaid with shimmering runes that glowed faintly. Drawn to it, she knelt, running her fingers over the carvings. They felt alive, pulsating faintly beneath her touch. She couldn't read the symbols, but their meaning resonated deep within her, not in words, but in feeling. This place is a covenant. The thought echoed in her mind, unbidden, yet undeniable. She looked up at the blossoms above, their light bathing the glade in a kaleidoscope of colours. Each flower contained a dream, a fragment of hope plucked from the hearts of those who had once walked the earth. The tree was not just the heart of the garden. It was a bridge, a link between the seen and unseen, where the essence of human longing took root and flourished. The golden dragon chirped softly, its gaze fixed on her. It hopped from her shoulder to the pedestal, curling its tail around one of the carved edges. As his claws touched the runes, a faint shimmer rippled outward, and the air around Lila grew heavier. She felt the presence of the other dragons closing in, their eyes luminous and expectant. Lila understood. The garden was not merely a place of beauty or solace. It was alive, bound to the dreams it protected. And now it was bound to her. The pedestal shifted beneath her hands, its surface growing warmer. The runes flared briefly, and a soft voice filled the air, not spoken but felt, like a melody carried on the wind. The light of the garden is eternal, but fragile. It flourishes only in the presence of hope and purpose. To guard it is to guard the dreams of the world. Lila's heart raced. She had come here seeking escape, but she had found something far greater, a purpose she had not dared to imagine. The weight of her sorrow, once so consuming, now felt distant, replaced by a profound sense of connection. The garden had called her not just to heal, but to protect. The golden dragon unfurled its wings and took to the air, circling above her. The others followed, their movements synchronized as they wove an intricate dance around the tree. The light of the blossoms seemed to respond, growing brighter, their colors swirling like the threads of an unseen tapestry. The melody returned deep and resonant, filling the glade with a sense of unity. As the dragon spiraled higher, the golden one descended, landing lightly before Lila. It extended its neck, and she saw now that it held something in its claws. A small glowing shard, no larger than a pebble. The light it emitted was unlike that of the tree or the blossoms. It was raw and untamed, pulsing with an energy that seemed to reach into the very core of her being. The dragon placed the shard on the pedestal, and the runes flared again, brighter this time. Lila reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the surface of the shard. A surge of warmth coursed through her, and for a moment she felt as though she were part of the garden itself, its roots, its branches, its light. She could feel the dreams blooming, each one a fragment of someone's deepest longing, their brightest hope. "This is your bond," the voice whispered again. "The shard is both guide and gift. With it, the garden's light will live within you, and through you, it will endure." Tears blurred Lila's vision as she lifted the shard. It was impossibly light, yet it seemed to hum with immense power. The dragons bowed their heads in unison, their eyes reflecting the glow of the shard. Lila felt their acceptance, their trust. She was no longer a visitor. She was a part of the garden, its guardian. As she rose, the glade around her shifted subtly. The light softened, and the melody quieted once more. The dragons began to disperse, their luminous forms fading into the trees and streams, their presence lingering like a faint echo. The golden dragon lingered a moment longer, its gaze steady, before it too took flight, disappearing into the glow of the blossoms. Lila turned back to the tree, the shard still warm in her hand. The garden stretched before her, vast and infinite, its secrets bound in light and shadow. She knew she would leave this place, but it would never leave her. The shard pulsed faintly, a reminder of her bond, her purpose. As she stepped back onto the path, the air around her seemed lighter, the garden's song now a quiet hum within her heart. She did not look back, for she knew the garden of dreams would always be with her, its light guiding her steps. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, dreams began to bloom once more.